Hey, welcome to some quick little astrology information. I'm Keith from Vedic Astrology. I focus primarily on Vedic Astrology. Anyway, so I just wanted to share a quick bit of information on the Mercury-Mars opposition. Today is Wednesday, the 4th of July, and yesterday, today, tomorrow, whatever, over this current little chunk of time that we're in, some very interesting things actually going on. So basically, if you look at the archetypal signification of Mercury, Mercury is communication primarily. Mars is ego. So when Mercury and Mars are opposed to each other, communication can become very easily quite loaded, quite competitive, quite argumentative. Okay. Now, you can, of course, put this to positive use in the sense that Mars is very dynamic, it's very energetic, and Mercury relates to the intellect. So the intellectual functions can be utilized and channeled in a very efficient direction, you know. Um, so that's kind of the very core basic meaning of Mercury Mars opposition. Be very careful of your words. Be very careful of being very defensive, being very argumentative, and getting your egos involved in your opinion. In other words, like falsely identifying with concepts and then defending them, overlooking the fact that they're actually just concepts, just mental constructs. They're not even real, but they tend to become so loaded and become so defensive over these things. Okay. Now, today is Mercury's day, so I thought it'd be appropriate to talk about it today. And at the time that I opened up this chart, it was 15:15, so it was 3:15. And here in South Africa, which is GMT plus 2 hours, it is the hour of Saturn. Okay, so I thought what I'd do is I'd just open up a chart for this time and use it as a horary just to flesh out a little bit of information from the cosmos in terms of where these energies might play out. So let me just share my screen and get to the point here. All right. Okay, you should be able to see the general chart that I'm looking at over there. Okay, so being the hour of Saturn, it is quite interesting because the Mars is sitting in Saturn sign. Okay, and Mercury is sitting in the Moon sign. Okay, now the Moon and Saturn aren't very friendly to each other. Okay, to start off with. Now there is another very important layer to this Mercury Mars opposition, because this Mercury Mars opposition isn't just your everyday Mercury Mars opposition. This Mercury Mars opposition is falling on top of the Rahu Ketu axis, which for those from Western astrology is the north node and south node of the moon. And for those unfamiliar with either of the two contexts, those are points in the sky in which, if new moons or full moons fall on those points, that's what creates eclipses. So Rahu and Ketu are not physical planets; they're actually shadow planets, but they operate in a unseen dimension. Okay, now if you look to Mars, Mars is conjunct Ketu, and Ketu is Moksha Karaka, and Moksha is final liberation, and Karaka is significator. So Ketu, interestingly enough, if you think of like Ketu being Moksha Karaka, all right, Rahu and Ketu are basically, you can kind of say it's like a serpent that's been slayed in half, where Rahu represents the head and Ketu represents the tail. So Mars is conjunct the tail, and the tail is called Ketu, and Ketu is Moksha Karaka, okay? And Mercury is conjunct Rahu, which is the head. Now, the Rahu represents insatiable desires, cravings, like obsessiveness, like because it's insatiable desires. So you find that the mind gets very locked into ideas and very locked into concepts. So Mercury is very fixated and very obsessed about ideas at the moment. So you'll find that inside your own head, in your conscious mind, there's a lot going on obsessively. And because it's being opposed by Mars, you'll find that there's a lot of anger brewing. So you might find yourself spinning these like angry concepts around and around in your head. So be very careful of that and be very mindful not to do that. Because within this same energy, is the potential for moksha, because Ketu is moksha karaka. Now I find it very interesting that Ketu is moksha karaka, because Ketu is the tail. There's no head, there's no mind, there's no intellect involved there whatsoever. So that shows you that final liberation in the sense that, like, freedom from desire, freedom from fear, it comes from moving out of the mind, whereas Rahu is completely in the mind, you know. So if you use that fiery energy of Mars, which is strongly related to the ego, you know, one needs to really put one's ego down and not become so defensive over concepts. And from that process, one will then become a little bit more free from desires and free from fear. And that will take the sting out of a lot of the potential contentious energy and the potential contentious defensiveness that is going on with the Mercury Mars opposition, because Mercury Mars is very competitive, it's very argumentative. Okay, now if you look at the charts, you'll see basically we've got Scorpio rising, and Scorpio is already very defensive, you know. So it shows you, kind of really shows you from the Horary point of view. And Mars Ketu conjunction is in the third house of courage and willpower and communication. So it's already showing you here, don't be overly defensive in your communication. You know, put your ego aside. You know, there's a very, very, very sort of kind of like strong will, like your will is very, very, very strong. And a person's willpower and a person's ego, when those two things get strongly involved and they become in opposition to Mercury, you know, communication can become very loaded. Now, the second house, and bear in mind that we're in the hour of Saturn at the time that this horary was done. So Saturn is in the second house of speech. So that already shows you that the things that you say, you know, the things that are coming out of your mouth, exercise a degree of restraint there, because Saturn's in Mula. So Mula is very restrained. Mula has the potential for restraint, you know. So exercise a degree of restraint in your speech, okay, and use your words very, very, very carefully, okay. Now, having said all of this that I've just been said, everything that was discussed always has to take place within a context, and the context that all of this takes place in is reflected by the placement of the moon, which is why the moon is so important in Vedic astrology. And the moon is in Purva Bhadrapada, okay, and the moon is actually sitting in, interestingly enough, the Gemini Pada of Purva Bhadrapada, which is all about communication as well. Now, Purva Bhadrapada has a very, very fiery energy. The deity associated with Purva Bhadrapada is Ajayakapada. Now, Ajayakapada is kind of symbolized as sometimes a two-faced person, a person that has one face in this world, one face in the other world, or even like a one-footed goat, the unborn one. So there's a very, very weird, strange energy about Purva Bhadrapada. Now, the fieriness of Purva Bhadrapada has the potential to burn one karmas. So it's generally quite an intense energy and quite an intense experience. Okay, so even the context that all of this is happening in at the moment, you know, a lot of karmas are being pulled out, a lot of fiery karmas are being burnt, you know, and out of this, you know, we stand the golden prize of moksha, which is liberation. Now, we're not going to be liberated from our fears and desires until these things are burnt and removed from within us, you know. So the advice with Purva Bhadrapada, where the moon is currently in, and round about midnight, this is South Africa GMT +2, round about tomorrow, the moon will be in Uttra Bhadrapada, which is a little bit more gentle, you know. So a very, very, very important to keep yourself grounded, you know, take your shoes off, stand, get connected to the earth, ground that energy. Don't be very, very defensive. Don't be defensive over concepts that are just intellectual concepts. Be very careful with your words. Put contentious energy aside. Use your mind and use the Mercury Mars opposition, which really generates a lot of mental activity. Direct that energy towards making plans, towards making goals, towards channeling ideas, you know, from the unseen realms that will create events in your life that will allow that will allow space for liberation and will allow space for freedom within your personal journey. Okay, so even if you look at the horary, Mercury, Venus, and Rahu are all in the ninth house of the higher mind. You know, so there is a there is a and the moon is situated in the fourth house of happiness. You know, so the soul of the world, you know, the universal soul, to tap into that wisdom, you know, because the ninth house represents the higher mind, it represents wisdom, you know, tap into that wisdom, you know, gain higher mind concept information, and then ground that into your foundation, because the fourth house is your foundation, it's your psychological foundation, which is why I said Purva Bhadra Padra insists on a person having a very firm spiritual foundation. So even in the horary, they can tell you that use your mind to study, to inquire, use that Mercury Mars opposition, that very, very energetic mind to 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 do deep inquiries into higher philosophical concepts, to give yourself a stronger spiritual foundation. And then with the Mars Ketu, you know, if you have to have strong willpower, have strong willpower for liberation, have strong willpower for higher knowledge, you know. And even if you look at the ruler of the fifth house, and the fifth house being the mind and the creator of our context, is in the 12th, also in the 12th of moksha. So even the mind has the capacity to really create moksha from this very loaded energetic dynamic. So use it wisely. The potential is there. It doesn't have to be a very contentious, argumentative time. You know, quieten things down, quieten the mind down, channel that energy wisely. Like for instance, today is Mercury's day. Okay, so being Wednesday, so what I done, bearing in mind that there's a Mercury Mars opposition, I used the Mars energy to do a very vigorous walk in a green environment, because Mercury rules green. You know, so that for me was a way of just getting the Mercury Mars energy out. And while I was walking through the green forest, doing the Mars energy, doing the Mercury thinking, I came up with a lot of ideas that are going to help me in the future, on my own personal journey. So that was just one way that I utilize these energies. So it's always good to be aware of what's going on, and it's always good to be creative and to use these energies in a creative context. And especially Mars being so fiery and active, it demands action. You know, action is key in this realm that we're in. So take action in a focused, useful context, and not don't waste it in an argumentative context. Use your energy wisely, use your time wisely. It's all that we've got in this realm. Thank you.